Today, with the first pick, the NFL regular season's in the books, so we're going to fire up the old mock draft machine for those 18 teams out of the playoffs and officially into the offseason. How many teams need quarterbacks, Mike? Which ones will take them? We'll talk about all that on today's show. But first, with the college football semifinals almost upon us, I'm going to give you some names to know ahead of the Penn State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State-Texas matchups. Players who should be on your draft radar over the coming weeks and months. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's Mike Renner, who you may recognize from such shows as the Bush and the Bow podcast. So glad to have Mike here. What with Rick Spielman out there saving the Jets from themselves, doing the Lord's work for Jets fans everywhere. This is episode 211, Mike. We have 106 days to the 2025 NFL draft. There you go. Thank you, producer Stryker, for flashing the graphic that Rick loves so much. And, Mike, I mentioned producer Stryker here because you're a Notre Dame alum. Producer Stryker. Here, let's see the shirt. There it is. Producer Stryker presumably has his James Franklin t-shirt on. He's a Penn State alum. You guys are both going to be at the game on Thursday. Any gum flapping you'd like to do in producer Stryker's direction before we get going here?
Well, I did it before, unwittingly, just saying that I was more scared of Georgia than I am of Penn State. I do think that Penn State's great. I think that Drew Aller is a special talent. I just think they don't have wide receivers to throw to, unfortunately.
I think Stryker would agree with that, as would producer Debo and many a Penn State fan around the world. Also worth noting, I don't know if you knew this, Mike. Mike's a Packers fan. Producer Stryker's a Tampa Bay fan. Which one of those teams are going to go further in the playoffs?
Oh, honestly, this one I can give to Tampa Bay. I do not foresee the Packers, unfortunately, beating the Eagles this weekend. So I'll give it to him on that one.
And the Debo is an Eagles fan, and I'm a Steelers fan, but let's be real. I think the Packers have a much better chance of winning that game than the Steelers do that. All right, that's it. That's enough of that. Let's talk about some college football semifinal prospects to watch action. We're going to start with your Notre Dame Golden Domers there. I'm going to list three guys, and you can talk in any direction you want, but these are guys that I'm interested in seeing. Two guys I like a lot, and one guy I want to see a little bit more from. Riley Leonard, the quarterback. I'd like to see a little bit more from him, but two guys I love on defense, Howard Cross III and Xavier Watts. Mike, what are you going to be watching on your Notre Dame team there that you desperately need to beat Strikers, Penn State, Nittany Lions?
Well, the crazy thing about Notre Dame and why this year kind of feels like just house money is almost all their best players are underclassmen at this point. They have some special talents on this roster. They are either freshmen or sophomores for the most part. The guys that are fueling this sort of playoff run are not guys who are draft eligible yet. So what I'm watching in terms of the draft eligible guys is going to be, one, is Howard Cross healthy. He went down at the end of that Georgia game, the Notre Dame defensive tackle. I loved him heading into the season, but he played a ton of snaps last year and just has kind of worn down over the course of the season with numerous injuries. So is he healthy? Because he's an undersized 3-tech sort of penetrator. And if he doesn't have that first step, his game isn't quite the same as we've seen at times this year. And then Xavier Watts, I mean, this guy is a super heady football player, incredible playmaker. I just wonder what kind of athlete is he and what kind of tackler is he going to be? Because in this game, his tackling is going to get tested. I don't think this game's decided through the air, with Riley Leonard or Drew Aller. I mentioned Drew Aller doesn't have the playmakers. Riley Leonard just doesn't have the arm strength to push it down the football field, unfortunately. So it's going to be decided on the ground. And with Xavier Watts, how is he going to fare in run defense tackling, the big behemoth, explosive behemoth that is Nick Singleton at running back for Penn State?
Right. So Howard Cross came back for what I think is the sixth season. I was talking to Ryan Harris about this, our colleague, who played at Notre Dame, won a Super Bowl with the Broncos, who does the Notre Dame radio broadcast now. He said Howard Cross is every bit of 285, which is better than what I had heard over the summer. And he thinks he's being undervalued, perhaps in a Braden Fisk sort of conversation, but maybe not that twitchy. Do you think there's a chance? Because it feels like day three is where teams are thinking about Howard Cross. I think he's a day two guy, and I think sometimes we just think about it too much.
I thought he was firmly a day two guy heading into the season. He hasn't had near the year he did in year 5 at Notre Dame. So it's been a little bit of a disappointment. I thought, like Braden Fisk was a 6-year guy coming out of Florida State. So I thought you would see just another level of production, another level of athleticism that was yet to be there. And now, again, injuries have played a factor. But I think because of the way the NFL covets undersized DTs. And that may be changing with the way schemes are going and more slants, more stunts, penetration being at a premium. He may get coveted a little bit higher, but at DT specifically, the NFL still likes to hit that 300-pound number, just in terms of if you're under that, double teams come and you don't have to do it. So it's not been his forte, and I don't expect that to be anytime soon. But this is, a stage for him to really put it on if it is going to push the stock back up into day two.
Yeah. Riley Leonard, I think I talked to you about this yesterday, but I feel like his future in the NFL may be a Taysom Hill situation, but we have time to sort that out. Let's talk about Penn State real quick here. Abdul Carter is going to be the name to watch. He got banged up last week. Didn't play the second half of that game against Boise State. James Franklin, the coach, said he is going to be a game-time decision, but the arrow appears to be pointing up. Do you want to talk about Abdul Carter? You can talk about Tyler Warren, Nicholas Singleton, any direction you want to go here?
Yeah, I think those first two guys you mentioned, Carter and Warren, they are firmly in the first round already. And Carter probably a top 5 pick already. So if my advice to him would be rest it. You don't want to risk your future on a minor injury. This game is just another game. You already put good tape out there. Make sure you're ready to get your millions in the draft. You don't want to risk it, right? No, but seriously, I think Abdul Carter's tape is insane. The more I watch this guy, and the more I just think about, this is his first year rushing the passer full time. The guy was an off-ball linebacker his first 2 years. I think he could be truly special at the next level. He's not quite Micah Parsons, no one is, but he's in that realm of athlete that few can touch. And just the more tape he puts on, the more he gets comfortable on the edge, the more I see a guy that I'm willing to take as, him and Travis Hunter are just, to me, the top 2 position players. Whatever you want. If you want the D lineman, I would take Carter over Hunter if that's what your need is. If you need the corner, take Hunter. But those 2 guys, to me, have cleared the rest of the field and the non-quarterbacks in this class.
Yeah, those are the guys you draft, Hunter and Abdul Carter, when you have a quarterback and you can rest easy knowing you're not going to get fired because of those picks.
Yep.
All right, let's talk about Ohio State, Texas. On Friday, the day after the Penn State Notre Dame game, down in Dallas, Texas, where it could be feet of snow on the ground. We'll find out together. I have about 25 guys listed for both teams, so I won't put the list out to you. You give me some guys, and I'll counter.
Yeah, to me, the first rounders aren't necessarily the story with these teams. It's the day two. The day 2 for both these teams is just utterly loaded. I think both have a couple first rounders, though. I would expect for Ohio State, I think Tyleik Williams, the DT, Meke Igbukwe, the wide receiver. I think ultimately those guys end up first rounders, even if it's maybe right at the end of the first round. Texas has a little more sure things, in my opinion, and Kelvin Banks, the offensive tackle, and Jahdae Barron in the corner. So those 4 I fully expect. But then on day 2, for these 2 teams, you could have up to 10 for each. It's insane the amount of talent these guys have, depending on who all declares. I'll just rapid fire the names I wrote down here. Ohio State, I have Josh Simmons, the left tackle, Donovan Jackson, the left guard, who's now playing left tackle, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, the 2 defensive ends there, the 2 running backs, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, their whole secondary, Denzel Burke, Lathan Ransom, Davis Igbenason, all those guys. Day 2 picks to some even, borderline day 1 in that mix. And then for Texas, their D-line, Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton, firmly in the day 2 mix. Their wide receivers, Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden. Their right tackle, Cameron Williams, Gunnar Helm, their tight end, Andrew Makuba, their safety. And then if Quinn Ewers does declare, I expect him probably to come back to school given how this year went. But if he does declare, I think he'd probably end up on day 2. So a lot of talent to go around there for both sides.
Funny thing is, I wrote down all these names. I still left out about 3 or 4 guys that you mentioned, so I appreciate that. Quickly, we're going to go to break in a second, but I want to ask you this. Assuming Quinn Ewers and Will Howard come out, is there a world where Will Howard gets drafted before Quinn Ewers?
Man, I can't see it, dude. Will Howard.
He's played so well the last 2 games.
I think he's rebounded well. He's not an athlete. I mean, they run him sometimes, and it pains me to watch him run. And just that aspect is so coveted. Even Quinn Ewers isn't a great athlete, but he has mobility to his game. Big arm for Will Howard, but I just don't see the developmental upside where Ewers, you've seen it in flashes. It's just, he keeps getting hurt. And he keeps being a roller coaster, but at least you see high level play to make you intrigued by where it could end up.
I'm laughing because producer Striker, this means that Will Howard's going to throw for 500 yards against Notre Dame in the final. So I'm looking forward to that happening. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, me and Mike are going to rip through these mock drafts for the 18 teams that are currently officially into the offseason right after this. Welcome back to With the First Pick here on CBS Sports Network. Brian Wilson, that's Mike Renner. All right, Mike, 18 teams officially into the offseason. They are not going to the playoffs. So we're going to do a mock draft of these 18 teams. For the next few minutes here, we'll talk about only the top 3 teams so we can discuss the quarterbacks and maybe one of the best players, or if not the best player in the draft. But you have the first pick. You were the Tennessee Titans. Mike Renner, who you taking?
I'm taking Cam Ward. I don't know. I mean, they don't have a GM, so maybe I could be the GM for them and take Cam Ward for them. But I think whoever it is, this is where you got to go. You can't ride with Will Levis anymore. I was a fan of him coming out. I thought he could develop into something, and I think he's developed in some ways, but he has zero pocket presence, and I don't see that changing any way, shape, or form going forward. Cam Ward has legit pocket presence. This guy feels pressure at a very high level. He takes sacks, yes, but he never makes it easy for opposing defenses. He always evades that first guy. He's got that unique ability to make plays outside of structure and has just high-end arm talent. And what I love is, like, he has gotten better every single year and has a legitimate excuse to be at sort of raw prospect in certain ways. Like, he came from a tiny high school that played 8-man football, I believe, in Texas, goes to Incarnate Word, to Washington State. Like, this guy did not get real deal quarterback training until relatively recently. And we've seen the leaps and bounds that sort of thing has made in recent years, like the quarterback mechanics and footwork and how much guys can improve at the NFL level. And with Cam Ward, to know that we've already seen him improve, like as well loose as he looks now on tape at Miami, it was even worse in his early days at Washington State. To see that he's ready to improve that much, man, I think his arrow is only pointed upwards. And if the arrow keeps pointing upwards, he could be very special at the NFL level.
Yeah, all those things you laid out are incredibly important. And maybe the most important, fair or not, is the athleticism, because we live in a world now where you can be a top flight pocket passer and it doesn't matter because the protection breaks down so quickly and you're not able to get to your reads. And I'll bring it up every time. I was a big Mac Jones guy. Mac Jones keeps screwing me every single Sunday, throwing interceptions and running out of bounds behind the line of scrimmage, and I'm just shaking my fist at the television. But again, athletes like Caleb, Jaden, even your guy Bo Nix, that creates issues for the defense. And Cam Ward, I think, brings all those things. He's not the athlete Jaden Daniels is, but he's probably in the Bo Nix category, maybe a hair below, but in terms of things he can do in space. And that's why it makes sense to me. I wasn't on the Will Levis train at any point. I think he's a great kid and all that stuff, but he didn't feel like a franchise quarterback to me. But I understand why you draft him if you're the Titans at the top of the second round. And that's why, as picking for the Cleveland Browns, and I have no idea if Coach Prime and Shedeur Sanders are going to be down with this, but if I'm the Browns, I need a quarterback. I'm taking Shedeur, and he's 1B for me because of the things you laid out in terms of the athleticism, the arm strength, the ability to make plays outside the pocket. Shedeur can do that, but I think athletically, arm strength-wise, he's just a hair below. He might end up being a little shorter. We'll find out in time. But I'll ask you this. Do the Cleveland Browns take a quarterback at 2? And does Shedeur Sanders go to Cleveland if he's drafted by the Browns?
The second part, dude, I don't know. I mean, I think the NFL specifically is not like the NBA where you need to go to a big market to get attention, right? This isn't a Giannis situation where a guy could be a superstar if he was elsewhere. And when the NBA creates NFL creates superstars regardless. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is ubiquitous in Kansas City, Central America. Like that ain't a big market, right? So I don't think that aspect matters. It's more, he'll want to go to a well-run organization. And as much as I think like the tides turned on that in Cleveland, I'm not so certain, right? There are better run organizations here, probably in the top 10, maybe not necessarily the ones that will want his services. So sometimes, beggars can't necessarily be choosers. In this situation, I think they could. I think Shedeur can name his spot in the NFL if he wants to. But there's a big pay difference between 2 and where the Raiders are drafted down at 6. That's a lot of millions of dollars that I'm not sure he's going to be willing to give up to say, I'm not going to play there. But for the Cleveland Browns, I want to say yes. If you have a grade on him worth taking here, you 100% do it. If you're that, you're not going to be back in this situation. Your roster's too good. You bottomed out because you started DTR the last half of this season. If they would just start Jameis, they would not be drafting here. So I don't think they'll be drafting here anytime soon because of that. If you got a high grade in one of these QBs, you 100% pull the trigger.
Right. And Myles Garrett has made it clear that he wants to find out the direction of this organization as well, because he's burning Hall of Fame years on a team that's going backwards at full speed. All right. You're picking third for the Giants. A team that inexplicably kept winning games down the stretch, scored 45 points to the Colts in the last week of the regular season. That didn't help their draft stock. They're picking third. They desperately need a QB. The best player on planet Earth that's currently available. What are you doing?
I am taking Travis Hunter, the wide receiver Travis Hunter, to pair with Malik Neighbors, because I think that could be a special wide receiver duo that you can go sign Sam Darnold, right? You can go sign Jameis Winston, because I think that's the route the Giants are going to take. You don't have a GM and head coach that were just put on notice by their owner to say things have to turn around. You don't have that. And then say, let me turn it over to a rookie quarterback. That ain't turning things around. 8 times out of 10 in NFL history, that rookie QB ain't leading you back to the playoffs to save your job. It's someone on the free agent market that could. And so I think that's the route they go. And if that's the case, I want Travis Hunter to pair with Malik Neighbors, because those are two freaky athletes that can do special things on a football field. And if you give me both of them, I don't think they're redundant talents. Like, I think they are complementary football players, and that they can do every single thing you want about the wide receiver position. Both relatively raw, but both guys that are just so special that I'm not sure it really matters that they're raw. You can still create an explosive offense around them.
All right, quickly, because we got to go to break here. Barista Strikers really wants to get to that Penn State game early. All right, I'm going to throw this out here. Usually the crazy scenarios don't come till later in the draft process, but here we go. If you're the Giants, would you trade down to 16 with the Cardinals for Kyler Murray?
Oh, gosh. Kyler saves their jobs, I think. I think he's good enough to save their jobs. It's just shooting for middling, though. It's an interesting... You still have a first-round pick. You are giving up on a Travis Hunter type of talent, but it is a quarterback. Huh. Yeah, I mean, I think I would do that. If I and that's the problem, because I'm Joe Shane and, Brian Dable. I think I'm doing it because he would save my jobs. So, yeah, I probably would.
Absolutely. I'm with you, man. I'm with you. Make it happen. All right, let's take a quick break. Come back. We're going to rip through the rest of this draft, starting with pick 4 and the Patriots right after this. Welcome back to With the First Pick here on CBS Sports Network. Ryan Wilson, Mike Renner. All right, Mike, let's get through picks 4 through 10. The Patriots in the most meaningless victory, perhaps in the history of football, in Week 18 against the Bills, now have the 4th pick. Cost Gerard Mayo his job, presumably. They're taking offensive tackle. I'm not overthinking it. Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas. He's my OT1. Some folks will like Will Campbell. We'll sort that out over the next 106 days. But they have to protect Drake May. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, especially if Travis Hunter is gone, and he is, because you took him 3rd with the Giants. At number 4, you are Trent Baalke. Congratulations. What are you doing for the Jaguars?
First off, I'll say Kelvin Banks is my OT1 too. I think this guy as an athlete is special, and Campbell may be the better player right now, but I think Banks is just he's going to get there. So for the Patriots, it may not be the immediate impact you want, but in time, it'll be the guy. If I'm Trent Baalke, unfortunately, I hate having to put myself in the mind of Trent Baalke. It's getting a little chaotic to do so. But I'm going Ted McMillan here. Because do you know that Baalke loves size? If we're talking about anything, if you're drafting a guy in the first round, it's Trent Baalke. His arms better be 34 inches. He better have a massive wingspan. That's Ted McMillan, 6'5", long, can make plays outside his frame with ease. He's one of the most coordinated wide receivers you'll ever see at that size. Truthfully, this guy should be on a basketball court. Most guys that move like him are playing high-level D1 college basketball or in the NBA right now. He's just that unique of a mover at that size. And that's what Trevor Lawrence loves, right? That's the routes that he throws. He throws these contested routes, these back shoulder throws. That's what he did for years at Clemson. That's what made him so special there. And the Jags decided, let's surround him with a bunch of slot wide receivers for his entire career. And it's always been a mismatch. So you got BTJ last year. And oh, by the way, you gave him one wide receiver in that mold, in the bigger, speedier wide receiver. And all of a sudden that guy explodes in that offense. Give him a second wide receiver in that mold. And I think you finally see the Trevor Lawrence that was promised on draft day. So that's what I'm doing if I'm the Jags picking here.
Well, we'll find a coach first and see how it goes from there. I mean, the Urban Meyer thing obviously didn't work. The Doug Peterson thing worked a little bit, and then it didn't. But I don't think it's Trevor Lawrence's fault. I was talking to Scott over the summer. Ted McMillan was described to me as a more athletic Drake London. So if you can get behind that, I think Ted McMillan makes a lot of sense. I love Ted McMillan. I wouldn't take him here as the Jaguars, but to your point, no one wants to be into the mind of Trent Baalke too long. So let's move on to number 6, where the Las Vegas Raiders also just fired their coach, Antonio Pierce. They need a lot of things. They need a quarterback desperately. They won 2 of their last 3. Didn't help their cause. They could have had the first overall pick, but they beat the aforementioned Jags and the Saints, and here we are. So, man, I don't know what their quarterback situation is going to look like if their GM, Tom Telesco, isn't accustomed to trading up, but maybe Tom Brady has something to say about that as a minority owner. All that said, I'm taking Mason Graham. He's one of the most dynamic players in this draft, let alone defensive lineman. He has a little Christian Wilkins in him. I think Rick Spielman, our buddy, compared him to Quinnen Williams over the summer. Either way, I love Mason Graham. He's electric, and the idea of lining him up next to Max Crosby has me pretty excited for a Raiders team that not a lot to get excited about, if we're being honest. Speaking of unexcitable, let's go to pick 7, the New York Jets. You get to be whoever Rick Spielman and Mike Tannenbaum decide is going to be the general manager in New York. Quarterback's in need, Mike. What are you going to do at 7?
Quarterback is need. Sadly, there's no quarterback here that I would even consider drafting. You'd have to wait like 3 rounds before I consider drafting one of these guys at this point. So I'm going Abdul Carter. I truly think he's much better than this point in the draft. I think he goes higher than this in real life. And if he's there for the Jets, this was more just like stopping the slide for him. I know they have Jermaine Johnson and a zillion other edge rushers there that Will McDonald that they just drafted in the first round the past couple of years. But I think Abdul Carr is a guy that's more of an every down player than Will McDonald, who was awful against the run this past year, even if he was a massive breakout star. So that allows Will McDonald to be more of your third down edge rusher and just keeps this D-line of strength for New York Jets. So again, not a need, but a player that, if he's there, just basically fits the way the Jets have been building this roster consistently.
Yeah, and on first glance, you might be like, yeah, they don't need that. But, Rick always says you can never have enough edge rushers, and I think that's exactly right, because you could just turnstile those guys through there and just wear out quarterbacks.
Yep.
And, we've seen quarterbacks get tired of getting hit by the middle of the third quarter, and then it just sort of snowballs from there. So I get that. This team has a lot of things to sort through, so this is going to be a fun offseason for them. Next up, the Carolina Panthers. And I would like to take this moment. I should have asked producer Stryker to have a graphic ready to let Pete Prisco know, if you're out there watching, Pete, that you were all up in Will Levis's business and you took every opportunity to belittle, literally and figuratively, my guy, Bryce Young. Bryce Young, Mike, you would agree, based on the stats, that over the final 9 games, outplayed C.J. Stroud. Let's start there.
Dude, he was electric down the stretch. That was Bryce Young. I mean, it was so good to watch because it didn't make sense, right? Like early this season, maybe year really one, rookies, whatever, rookie season you could throw out for a lot of guys in NFL history, how they played there compared to the rest of their careers. But the first 2 weeks, I was like, this guy forgot what the heck he was doing. It was a mental thing through and through. And that's what made him special to Alabama, was the confidence, was the quickness with which he played. He was just such a high-level mental processor. His S2 scores got bandied about everywhere, but like he had elite S2 scores, and that's what he played like at Alabama. And finally, we saw it again. We saw it again down the stretch. He was electric. They just need to put some talent around him. So, yeah, Bryce Young, he's the quarterback of the future. He's a franchise quarterback. I don't think there's any debate about it right now. What he put on tape was not fake at the end of the year.
I think producer Stryker, in his infinite awesomeness, does have a graphic for Bryce Young. And shout out to Dave Canales, too, for getting the most out of him. My goodness, look at that, Mike. Not only a graphic for Bryce, but comparisons to Will Levis. If only we could superimpose Pete Prisco's face over Will Levis. And no disrespect to Will. This is all about our colleague Pete Prisco and the negativity he brings to my draft process. I love it. Oh, by the way, I had the Panthers taking Mike L. Williams, the edge rusher out of Georgia, who's another freakish athlete, and I think his best days are in front of him. I think we've talked about it before, Mike. A little Travon Walker-esque, but not going to go first overall, but have a chance to grow into that role. And all right, thanks for that, Stryker. Next up, the Saints, a team with needs at quarterback, wide receiver, even tight end, cornerback, edge rusher. What are you doing for the Saints?
Yeah, they can go anywhere. It's just start the rebuild. I want Will Johnson from Michigan, the cornerback, because one, I think he's like that level of prospect. I think he's even higher than this, going to end up higher than this on my big board. My final one has been awesome since his true freshman year, was probably one of the biggest reasons why they won the national championship last year. And the only reason he's probably not getting talked about higher than this is that he had turf toe all season long and basically didn't play much this season. But superior talent. They just traded away Marshawn Lattimore. This slides back into that role. Even though Cooley McKinstry, I thought, played great. You have other corners there on the roster, but you need 3 to 4 of those guys nowadays if you want to be an elite defense in the NFL. This gives you one of them. So I do think the Saints could go a lot of different places. That's one pick in this draft where you're not going to be able to peg them down any way, shape, or form because of how many needs are on that roster. But if he's on the board there, the value's too good.
Yeah, we'll see. Derek Carr said he's not taking a pay cut, so we'll see what that means for his future. In terms of Will Johnson, I think the easy comp is probably Patrick Surtain. So we'll see and if that's something you're interested in, then Will Johnson might be your guy. Yeah, a really good player, just as you mentioned, had the injury issue for much of the season. All right, pick 10 here. I don't say this often, but this is best case scenario for the Chicago Bears because Will Campbell just falls into their lap. Braxton Jones, their left tackle, battled injury. They drafted Darnell Wright in the first round, the right tackle, a few years ago, and he's been good, and I think he's going to continue to improve. So you get Will Campbell, the left tackle at LSU. You plug him in to left tackle, and you continue to build around Caleb Williams. If tackles are gone, the top 2 guys are probably where it's at. Maybe you look to edge rusher. We'll see what happens with Keenan Allen. I don't know if you want to take a receiver this high after taking Roma Dunze a year ago. That position, there's some other needs on defense you could fill. But if it's offensive tackle and it's Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks Jr., man, that has got to be the pick for the Chicago Bears. Of course, they have to figure out the head coaching situation. All right, Mike, before we go to break, let's recap these top 10 picks here. First up, you took Cam Ward to the Titans. I think Will Levis's days are perhaps numbered. Maybe he stays on the roster, but I don't think he's going to be a starter, at least going into the season. I took Shedeur Sanders to the Browns at number 2. The big question, of course, is will Shedeur want to go to Cleveland? Cleveland did extend, or rework, I should say, Deshaun Watson's contract, so he's going to be in town for at least a little while longer. Next up, you took Travis Hunter to the Giants. Best player in this class as far as I'm concerned. I took, for the Patriots, Kelvin Banks Jr., the left tackle for the Texans, from Texas. They have to protect Drake May. Titans at 5. Tedro McMillan, the wide receiver out of University of Arizona. Mason Graham goes next to the Raiders. Abdul Carter to the Jets. Edge rusher out of Penn State. Michael Williams, Georgia edge rusher, goes to the Carolina Panthers at 8. At 9, Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan, goes to the Saints. And finally at 10, the Bears get their left tackle in Will Campbell, and they rebuild that offensive line around Caleb Williams. All right, let's take a quick break. We're going to come back and get through picks 11 through 18 right after this. Welcome back to With the First Pick here on CBS Sports Network. Ryan Wilson and Mike Renner. All right, Mike, 1 through 10 are in the books. Pick 11. You're John Lynch. You're picking for the 49ers. They have real needs at cornerback, maybe even offensive line, safety, and even linebacker. What are you going to do?
I am going to go a little bit differently because I don't think this qualifies as a need, but it kind of did at the end of the year, and it's running back in Ashton Jeanty, the Boise State all-world Heisman runner-up. He is he's like Bijan Robinson level of prospect. I think he's even maybe a little bit better. I think he has a little bit better long speed than Bijan did, and I think he runs just a little bit tougher than Bijan did coming out of Texas. So I think he's a tremendous prospect. And it's Kyle Shanahan. He wants to run the football. He wants to keep that threat there every single game and base everything else off of it. That's how you have success with the Brock Purdy. It's not drop him back to pass 40 times a game. It's letting him pass in advantageous passing situations. And Ashton Jeanty can get you into advantageous passing situations. The guy is freakish talent. So yeah, you got Christian McCaffrey there on the roster, but his cap hits are inflating here after that extension he signed. And after the injury-plagued year he had a year ago, he never looked the same, even when he was back on the football field. So if he doesn't come back to full strength, as we've seen for a lot of these guys at that age after injuries strike, you're going to need somebody. And I think Ashton Jeanty, the talent, if he's on the board there for someone, Kyle Shanahan, that you get the career of Ashton Jeanty in his offense, I think he'll go for that over what's a mediocre class at this point. There's no blue chip player he's really passing up, in my opinion.
I counted 10 teams in the first round that could potentially take a running back named Ashton Jeanty. I'll ask you this before we move on to pick 12 with the Cowboys. I'll set the over under at 11.5, the picks with which before or after Ashton Jeanty gets drafted.
I think people have seen what Jahmyr Gibbs did in Detroit. People are seeing what Saquon did in Philly, and I think the tide will turn a touch back towards running backs and being willing to take them when they are this level of talent like Genty is highly in the draft. So I'll go under.
Yeah, and I said 11.5 because I picked 12 for the Cowboys, and of course we always think the Cowboys need a running back. I'll just say this, and I did this in my mock draft that you and I talked about on HQ that came out on Monday. I had Ashton Genty still available at pick 12 when the Cowboys went on the clock, and I still had them taking Jihad Campbell, the freakish defensive player, because he's an athlete at this point. You can line him up at off ball. You can line him up at the edge, wherever you want to. Just declare for the draft. He doesn't turn 21 until a few weeks from now. So here's a question for you. Ashton Genty's gone, so they need to fix the linebacker situation, especially with DeMarvin and Overshown, likely potentially out in 2025 too because of the knee injury, which is too bad because he was electric. Would you take Jihad Campbell or would you take Georgia's Jalen Walker if this is the position you were targeting?
I would probably go Jihad Campbell because I think he's better at true linebacker. Because I think Walker is an edge at the next level. I just think that's where he ends up. And I don't think not to say you don't want two guys like Micah Parsons, but Micah Parsons gives up a lot in run defense. You can't, and Jalen Walker does too. 242 pounds. He's not going to be an every down sort of high impact run defender. You're drafting him because he's a high level pass rusher. But Campbell, as an off ball linebacker, is a high level run defender and a high level blitzer, even if he's not, a great sort of, cover player. He's the guy that I trust as an every down linebacker. So because of that, I think I'd lean Campbell for them.
Love it. Love it. Because you talked about this the other day. Jihad Campbell's sort of been late on the scene in terms of the media's acknowledgement of who he is, in part because he was younger and in part because
breakout year.
Exactly. And Jalen Walker would certainly get a lot of the much deserved love over the course of the fall as well. All right, next up, Miami Dolphins. Man, I swear, I don't know why this team plays so soft down the stretch. It's infuriating because I think Mike McDaniel's a great coach and they have obviously an electric offense. Are you going to help Tua? What are you doing here?
I am. I wish I could help him with some offensive linemen, but that ship has sailed once Will Campbell's off the board, in my opinion. So I'm going to go Luther Burden here, the Missouri wide receiver. Tyreek Hill, when you change your Twitter background to Antonio Brown, it's over, right? He's gone. He ain't going to be there anymore. And while I don't think you necessarily needed Tyreek Hill for that offense to still be high level, you need someone to replace him. The cupboard's kind of bare there. I like Malik Washington. He made some plays for them. I don't trust him to be, your number two across from Jalen Waddle. So I would trust Luther Burden to be that. And he's perfect for this offense. A lot of one-cut routes, a lot of, get the ball in the guy's hands and let him work. That's what he's the best at. He's not a polished route runner, but he's a high-end athlete who can separate, on the break of his routes. And so you let him run slants, let him run like corners. And I think he can run those in his sleep and be a productive football player for the Miami Dolphins. So that's the kind of talent I want in this Dolphins offense to replace the Tyreek Hill. Not a Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill clone. I don't need the speed. I got the speed in Waddle. I need a guy who can be a little bit tougher, a little bit more physical.
And Waddle and Achane and Jalen Wright. I mean, the list goes on and on. You can get, and I mean, Luther's plenty explosive as well, but I actually love that pick. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think outside of the offensive line that you mentioned, Tua would certainly appreciate having a post Tyreek Hill solution, and Luther Burden fits that mold for sure. Next up, the Indianapolis Colts. I actually put a question mark, like would they be thinking about a quarterback because this team is so all over the map. Shane Steichen is back, and the GM is back as well for now. We'll see how it plays out. So I went defense. Last year they went Leatu Latu, the first defensive player off the board at 15, I believe. Here they're picking 14. I had him picking the aforementioned Jalen Walker out of Georgia. The versatility he provides, you talk about he's more edge rusher than off ball. I think they can find ways to use him and get the most out of his abilities on that defense, which was up and down at times. Safety was a consideration here as well, and there's a young man we'll talk about in a moment that was a real consideration in the secondary. But I just love the athleticism that Jalen Walker brings, the edge with which he plays, and that's one less concern for a team with a lot of issues as they head into the offseason. All right. I mentioned this team at the top as a potential trade partner with the Giants for Kyler Murray, the Arizona Cardinals. That was a fever dream I was having. In reality, they're going to keep Kyler, I would imagine. But you are picking Monty Austin for the Arizona Cardinals at 16. What are you doing here?
I think the Atlanta Falcons now at 15. Do I have?
Oh, yeah. I skipped you. Thank you. Thank you for helping me out there. I was trying to
James
make
Pierce.
you. I'm Monty Austin Fort. You're Terry Fontenot. My bad, Terry. You're the Atlanta
Terry
Falcons
Fontenot.
here. You're picking at 15.
I got an easier job here because their need is very
Real.
obvious. They need a pass rusher, and I'm going James Pierce from Tennessee. I had higher hopes than what he put on tape this past season, but there's no doubting that he's like an unbelievable athlete. I am looking forward to what he's going to test like at the combine. I think it's going to be in a similar range to what we saw from Dallas Turner a year ago. I think 4.4s, 40-inch vertical. He's just like, he is that. Now, he's not a power player. He needs to get stronger. He still looks like a build-wise, almost like a wide receiver. But we're seeing athletes like that being able to make an impact more and more at the NFL level. Your Nick Bonitos of the world in these new wave of defenses. And we saw it already with, Byron Young when Raheem Morris was over as DC of the Rams. That guy was a guy who ran a 4.4, explosive athlete, has one of the best rookie seasons of any defensive lineman in that draft class. So I think he knows how to put athletes in an advantageous situation at the edge position. Falcons just didn't have any. They didn't have any guys to do that. Their best pass rusher was an off-ball linebacker in Caden Ellis. So I think James Pierce fits the need, fits the mold. Easy pick for them.
I'm glad you mentioned Byron Young and Nick Bonito because they're both undersized-ish, quotation marks, compared to where you typically have guys that are 265 or whatever. And that's James Pierce. I think he was listed at 247. I thought he played much bigger than that, and you talked about the juice that he has. I love it. They drafted Braylon Trice last year in the second or third round, I believe, out of Washington. He was injured, so he hasn't played at all this season, and he'll get healthy and come back, of course. But other than that, you mentioned Caden Ellis. They have Arnold Ebiketie, who flashed at times, but they need a little more consistency there, and that's been a conversation for what feels like 2 or 3 years now. All right, now the Arizona Cardinals are on the clock. I'm Monty Austin Fort, and I'm taking Kenneth Grant, the 330-pound interior defensive lineman, played alongside Mason Graham at Michigan. They drafted Darius Robinson, the edge rusher, at 290-ish pounds last year in the first round out of Missouri. He was banged up for part of the year, so continue to beef up the interior defensive line and help that Cardinals unit out on defense. I'm a Kyler fan. I think he's fine in Arizona, but we'll see how that plays out. All right, now, this is interesting because the Cincinnati Bengals have fired Lou Anarumo. Their defense stunk. There's no other way to put it. Their offense was electric. And I wrote down these needs: running back, wide receiver, cornerback, edge rusher, defensive line, safety, virtually every position on defense. And then you could get cued on offense if T. Higgins doesn't come back, or if you wanted to get a Ashton Jeanty, for example, should he be there. What are you doing, Mike?
Yeah, I had a couple of ways I could go with this. I was debating Walter Nolan from Ole Miss because their DT position was one of the worst in the NFL this past season. But I also hated what I saw from their safeties. And I love Malachi Starks, the Georgia safety, as a talent. I think he is a tremendous, one of the better safety prospects we've seen in the past half decade. Probably just right behind a guy in Kyle Hamilton, who was awesome coming out of Notre Dame. But Malachi Starks, versatile, whether it's he can play corner, he can play slot, he can play deep, he can play box. He is that kind of guy that everyone's looking for, that with these defenses that are so multiple around the NFL, he's that safety that you just feel comfortable playing wherever. So if he falls to 17, yeah, you need the DT, but this is a run the card in situation if I'm the Bengals, because of how much your defense was impacted by your poor safety play a year ago.
And your decision not to bring back Jesse Bates, which sort of led to the poor safety play that. All right, pick 18. I'm John Snyder. My Monday mock draft on the CBSSports.com, I zigged John Snyder and took Luther Burden. Luther Burden's gone. So grade this pick for me. I'm giving Geno Smith, Eugene Cyril Smith III. Producer Strikers tight end. Tyler Warren, tight end Penn State, who, you talk about Jahad Campbell having a breakout year. Tyler Warren, my man, went crazy in 2024. Are you buying what I'm selling in terms of him going to Seattle?
It depends. I have to punt on this, unfortunately, because I need to know who their OC is. I would love for Seattle to get back to a more run-heavy approach, to stop what they were doing. And they fired Ryan Grubb, obviously, because they were like, if it was Ryan Grubb's offense, I would have hated it. They just didn't have room for a tight end in what they were doing. Their run game and how they schemed it up, I don't think a tight end would have been advantageous. But if they get back to a little bit more power run game, if they get back to a little bit more condensed formations, I think Tyler Warren's a special talent as a complete tight end, inline blocker, sort of a guy who can be, your safety security blanket over the middle of the football field, and a guy who could be a red zone threat continuously. I don't think he's the explosive Sam Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, Brock Bowers that we've seen go in the first round. He's more of a throwback tight end. So if you're going to a throwback offense, yes, I would love this pick, but it remains to be seen how the Seahawks are going to trend offensively with who they go and target as an offensive coordinator. But I think Mike Macdonald is going to go back to that because of what he said in firing Ryan Grubb. It seems like he wants to go more ground and pound. And so if that's the case, Tyler Warren's going to be the best guy in this draft class and doing just that.
All right, we'll put a pin in it and circle back and see who the OC is in Seattle, and we'll regrade that pick. For now, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Mike, we're going to talk about some of these quarterbacks who weren't drafted and where they might end up going, if not in the first round, and we'll talk about that right after this. Welcome back to With the First Pick here on CBS Sports Network. All right, Mike, we got about 3 or 4 minutes left. I'm going to throw some names out at you, and you tell me where you think they get drafted. Now, we were just talking with producer Striker in the break, and both you guys think Drew Aller is the next coming of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. He is still coming back to school for now, so we'll table that for the moment. But we know that Cam and Shador are probably going to be first-round picks. Next up, I would imagine Jalen Milroe. What round are you taking Jalen Milroe out of Alabama?
Well, here's the thing. If Jalen Milroe wants to play a different position, I'm actually taking him higher than if he wants to play quarterback. Now, I get that he doesn't, but the guy is a freak athlete. I mean, he's probably going to run like a 4.3 something at 225 pounds. And the problem is, I don't think running back's his position if you're changing the positions, because I don't actually love his vision as a runner, but he's so dynamic. You could put this guy at wide receiver, and I think he could be like a true, kind of how, Pryor, why am I blanking on his name? Terrell Pryor was after with a wide receiver and couldn't play it and play at high level at the NFL. So at quarterback, though, I just did not see a guy who operated anything resembling an NFL offense. He's got a good arm. He's obviously insanely mobile, and he's probably a good deep passer, but they basically built the entire plane out of his ability to throw deep. And we're just doing deep dropbacks, deep concepts. If it was anything other than that, he struggled so mightily. And we kind of just did this with Anthony Richardson, taking a guy who isn't a quarterback yet and trying to make him a quarterback. And we've seen how long that's taken the Colts. I don't know if anyone has that kind of patience to really sit through Milroe's ups and downs for what I would imagine to be probably a 3 or 4 year process. So because of that, I think he still gets drafted highly because, again, it's an athlete-driven league, and someone will try it, but I would say probably around where Jalen Hurts wins, where Jalen Milroe is going to go. Okay.
Yeah, and Jalen Hurts was certainly farther along as a passer. So I've got a minute left here, and I'll just say this. I was talking to a scout when Anthony Richardson was drafted, and he said, if you told me in 5 years Anthony Richardson's an all-pro at quarterback or tight end, I would believe you. And that's sort of the conversation with Jalen Milroe. Quinn Ewers, is he getting drafted day 2?
He has to come back to school. But he would go day 2, I think. I think he'd go in the 3rd round if he came out. But he keeps getting hurt. He has to come back to school.
I'm sort of with you. All right, quickly, give me a name here. Best player, non-QB that wasn't selected in our top 18.
I'm going to go Colson Loveland, the Michigan tight end.
That's what I
think he's special. I think he's just a special route runner. I think he gets open at will, and they didn't have anyone to get it to him.
Love it. I agree with you. All right. That's all we got time for here today on With the First Pick. Thanks to Mike Renner for joining us. You can check out our podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, or just scan that QR code there. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.